Game changers. Welcome to At the Desk with Dr. Qua, where transformation begins with conversation. Listen, today we're diving into one of the toughest challenges in education, implementing change. Whew. Schools are full of bright, brilliant ideas and bold initiatives, but change isn't easy. My guest today, Dr. Najla Solomon, is a 25-year veteran with experience as a teacher and administrator. She's a first generation college grad with earning her BA and MA from St. Peter's College and her EDD. Who's Eddie? Her EDD
Ed
school
follow.
leadership. Huh?
Eddie is the guy
From
that's been following me my whole life.
yeah, oh really? Okay. Her EDD in educational leadership from Kent University. She's deeply passionate about literacy and advancing educational opportunities for Black and Brown scholars. Dr. Solomon brings real world experience in successfully leading and supporting turnaround efforts. How do I know? She was my partner in crime when we turned around the school. And so together we'll explore the barriers, the breakthroughs, and the strategies that make school transformation possible. Welcome, Dr. Najla Solomon.
Well, thank you for having me, and
You're
thank
gonna
you for
have to
having
project,
Ed.
sister.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having Eddie join us. Ed join us in
Yeah,
this
tell
conversation.
Eddie to go sit somewhere, right? Oh my
Well,
goodness.
Eddie has to come along for this journey because it is the reason why I have a higher level of expertise in this field, right? So
Okay, okay. Well, Eddie, pull up a seat and join the conversation. How's that?
there we go. There we go.
So
There we go.
let's start this conversation because 25-26 school year starts for scholars next week, as well as for practitioners. I believe Tuesday. Most of them. Some schools have already started. Each person walking into their building is going to have to deal with some kind of change. So the question at hand is why is change so difficult to implement in schools, especially even when everybody knows it is needed?
Kwame, you could look at that from so many different angles. Why is change needed? Think about it from a perspective of, our Black and brown kids, right? We have so many children in our urban mecca centers, right, who are struggling as readers, who are struggling as mathematicians. And so something has to we have to figure out a way to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody that's coming into one of those centers, right, the schoolhouse, you're going to be part of change if you want to see something different occur, right? And if you
Hmm.
don't want to be part of a change, then you got to find another space where maybe kids are accelerating. But right now in our urban centers, that is not the case for most of our urban districts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
schoolhouses. So, the type of change that needs to happen is on a broad scale because you have to figure out what's the systematic problem that is occurring that where change has to occur. So um it can be a little overwhelming, but going into those spaces you have to anticipate some kind of change happening when you have children who are not performing at the levels as their counterparts.
Okay. So I think that sets the stage. So let's talk about the different kinds of change schools face, right? So, in your experience, what types of change, instructional, structural, cultural, tends to be hardest for schools to embrace?
um
Hmm.
what I've found, right, has been the instructional side.
Mm-hmm.
And that paradigm shift, that mentality of um coming into a space where you know you've been told as educators that what you have been doing has been right, to some degree.
Mm-hmm. To some,
But then
right?
now, right? But then now you, because so many children are failing or not performing at the highest level, now you may be told that you're not doing so good as you thought you were in the beginning, right? And so that's a hard pill to swallow as
Hmm.
an educator, particularly for those who have been doing it for years, right? Um, most educators, when they begin teaching, right, they do what they feel has been working. And if you've been used to getting kudos from, because
Hmm.
something it's something that we're not doing correctly. So I think because as educators we've gone to school to assume a high level of instructional capacity, right? And being able to deliver content to our children,
Hmm.
it is tougher to now hear you got to do something different because what you've been doing is not working,
Right.
right? So I think from the instructional standpoint, it's like, why are you telling me that I'm not teaching well?
Right. And also
So
the
I
fact
think
that I think the other piece to that is also the comfortability that individuals have. I've always done it this way. It's worked, but failing to realize that it's no longer working. It's not
Mhm.
yielding the results that it once did. And so when you tell a practitioner, a veteran especially, listen, yeah, the stuff that you used to do work 15, 20 years ago, it's not working right now. They have a hard time coming to terms with that reality. And that oftentimes becomes something that they take personal because they feel that you are attacking them, right?
Mhm.
Um, they make it very few, very few embrace the feedback and make the necessary pivot and needed to make the change so that scholars can benefit from the new practice that they're implementing.
And also Kwame, right? So, not to just, as leaders, right? As building leaders,
Mm-hmm.
when you've been managing a space, right? Let's just say it is your school that is not doing well overall and not just the
Mm-hmm.
classroom. And so the way that we may have learned initially to be leaders may not be what that schoolhouse requires or needs at that moment, right? So the paradigm shift also has to take place in the minds of school leaders, right? Because there's also the two school of thoughts about how you lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some OGs, so to speak, right, have been managerial leaders, right? Obsessed with paperwork, obsessed with
Mm-hmm.
processes,
Mm-hmm.
procedures,
Absolutely.
right? And again, going back to the instructional piece, right? Because now, if you've been used to leading in that way, now you have to shift your thinking and think about how do I now become an instructional leader to those cohort of teachers that need the support in order to, create achievement in their spaces. So, so I think overall, the culture that shit has to shift, right, in the entire building.
True.
And,
And so, of course, as we talk about this, it's critically important that we understand that change isn't just technical, it's deeply human, right?
mm,
And so, with that, what role do trust, fear, and even burnout play on how staff respond to change?
yeah. So,
Because I got some stories coming for you.
but you know what? It's crazy, Kwame, because coming into any situation where newness has to occur or something
Mm-hmm.
different has, people probably start off with not trusting each other, right? Um, especially if it's a new leader coming into a space, right? There's always that sense of distrust because they don't know you, they don't know what you're about,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And as a building leader, let's just say you've been that building leader that may have been used to giving teachers highly effective and effective ratings, and now someone has come to you as the building principal and has said, nah, and everybody ain't highly effective and effective, bruh. You got people failing in that space. So how are you rating these people like that? So now you got
Right.
to eat a slice of humble pie and be like, well, dang,
Absolutely.
was I really giving out these scores like this? So now you come in, or the leader comes in rather, and now starts to give out twos. And people been used to getting threes and
Ooh,
fours. So
fours,
now
fours, or
this trust,
negotiating,
right? So then
negotiating
now,
threes and fours.
right? So then now there's that element of, I don't trust you either, dude. And you've been rocking with me for like the last 10 years. I don't trust you because now you're endangering my job. You're now
Mm-hmm.
telling me I'm not, when, right? When you've told me in the past that I am this great educator,
Right.
right?
So,
So there's a level of distrust that happens between both parties.
when we talk about trust too, the human element associated with change, you know, we talking about trust. We also talking about, hey, if change is about to happen, one, the fear of the unknown, the disruption to routines, as you've mentioned, job security. It's possible we could also be looking at competence, right? That might play into the equation. A loss of some control that individuals may have had around the building. Now there's a fear that that might be taken away or that they may lose that. So all of those things play a role in what I call the resistance, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I share one that you're familiar with. When we were partners in
Partners.
crime trying to transform one of the schools, you and I worked in. I vividly remember having a staff meeting where we talked about some new protocols that were coming to bear. And, everybody in the room, yeah, of course, that sounds great. That sounds great. Unbeknownst to us, shortly after the meeting, some some teacher leaders in the building began making phone calls and basically telling everybody, we're not doing X and or Y. And we're just going to yes them when they're in our face, but we're not going to do that. And it was like, wow, you have a whole um, cohort of individuals who are like, yeah, we're going to resist from the rip. It's not about the children. This is about them. It's about grown-ups, right?
Right.
Grown-ups who get paid on the 15th and 30th or whatever the time frame might be. And they are literally collaborating to undermine this possible change that we're looking to implement. So those
Yeah.
elements really sometimes make it difficult to make the change effective or even
Yeah.
take place,
Yeah, I
right?
remember. I remember that, it's never easy navigating through resistance. And there's a passive resistance that often occurs, right, when you're trying to evoke change, you know. And I can't say, like, my experiences have not been where I've had a whole school resistance, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have pockets of
Pockets.
resistance, and so as a building leader, right, you're charged with trying to navigate through those pockets of resistance, keeping in mind that you are dealing with that human element, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
while we advocate children, 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 at the end of the day, people are worried about their jobs,
Of course.
right? The building leaders too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there
Hey, the
is
pressure is
a
on
high
us.
level, right? There is a high level of accountability that comes with transformation that not everybody is comfortable with. including the building leader at times, right? Because now you're asked to start looking at things with a deeper magnifying glass, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are accountable for designing annual goals. You have to hit and meet those goals. And the frequency to which you hit and meet those goals make the determination for at least the state of New Jersey if in fact you are making progress. Right. So, I think from the human aspect, there is fear that sets in, I think, for everybody at some point, right? And then it's your charge as the building leader to not pass that fear on, right? Because there is a level of fear. Like, if I'm honest, like, I remember when I first walked into a space of resistance as a school leader, there were fears that set in for me, like, oh my God, am I going to be a good enough example for my teachers in order to get them? And then how do I show them that I am a good example of leadership,
Right.
right? How do I get them to care about children the way that I care about children, right? And am I going to be good enough where they want to follow me versus abandon ship, right? And so those have been my reality fears, right? And so I think that there's, just like teachers, we all have that element of fear, but our job as the building leader is to not impress that fear upon our staff, but to show
Of
them
course.
that we can do what we're asking them to do. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's powerful. Now, sometimes change fails not because of people, but because of the way it's rolled out. Right. I think you and I were talking earlier, and I mentioned the fact that, I mentioned part of my research on change using the researcher John Cotter. He came up with an 8-step process, right? How you build a sense of urgency, forming a coalition. It's a list of 8 steps that has to be taken to ensure that that change is effective. The
Hmm.
challenge is that within the school system, you don't have the luxury of that time for
Right.
going through the entire process. So think about it. During the summer break, teachers are away. You got some mandate that's saying it's effective, September 25, you have to implement X. You're running around trying to figure out, okay, how are we doing this? That means we got to change this schedule or that schedule. So those are things that makes it difficult, especially when we start talking about the rollout of some of these change elements that we want to implement. So, you know, common mistakes and pitfalls, the question becomes, what are some common mistakes schools make when trying to implement change? And how can leaders, you know, avoid that?
Yeah. Um, Good question. So I think common mistakes is one of them could be just getting in and not knowing all the details, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing the details or the facts behind what is driving the need.
Right.
Um, in addition to that, makes me think about not knowing what the symptoms are that's producing the need. And so when you don't know, it's like a doctor, right? The doctor can say to you, you can go to the doctor with all these symptoms, but if you're not telling him what those symptoms are, he doesn't know how to treat you,
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing about public education, most children will never tell you what is going on unless you
Hmm.
develop a relationship with them, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and so going into a space, there are a lot of assumptions that are made, right? There could be assumptions from, because I'm in an urban space, children can't excel, right? That's an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're not excelling based on how society views acceleration or how the Department of Education deems necessary for acceleration, but there's genius in all of them, right? And so
Absolutely.
we got to trying to figure out and navigate why that genius hasn't come out in the classroom or in the
Mm-hmm.
schoolhouse. When you go into a space and you're not cognizant of why that genius hasn't come out, and you just try to put stuff in place, you're always going to fail. Right. Likewise, trying to evoke change, if you're looking at particular classrooms, you don't know, if you don't have any background knowledge of why uh, that teacher may not performing at their highest altitude, aptitude or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you just trying to evoke change for the sake of evoking change, you're always going to fail because you don't have enough background. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that school leaders do is trying to go in and implement change without knowing what's the call, why it's needed. And then
Mm-hmm.
also too much change at once,
Right.
right, can cause, you know,
A whole lot of
a
headache.
whole lot of a whole lot of
A
issues.
whole lot
A whole lot of issues.
of.
Too much change, right?
Too
Too
much
much.
change, but that's the issue or one of the plagues of urban education, the frequency of change, right? You and I were talking. I did part of my research was on looking at certain school locations where almost on an annual or a year and a half rotation, there's a new admin, right? So when leadership is inconsistent, after a while, folks don't want to put forth the energy on this change coming because next month we might get some new individual that's also going to come with a different set of things that they want to do, right? And
Right?
so
And
in those spaces, you and I know there's always a wager going on.
there's a gambling. There's that gambling that happens.
That
You
gambling
know,
that happens, right? Let's see how
right,
long this guy's gonna last.
right. And then that's where you get the passive performance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's just do enough so they don't bother us because they about to leave in a minute. You
Right.
know, um, and then
And that's what they call quiet quitting.
yeah, yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
they just do just the bare minimum. So you don't get on them. You keep it moving. You think they're doing something, but they're not giving you 100%.
yeah. And it's crazy because I remember when I transitioned into a district. Won't name that district, but
Please don't.
I remember when I no, I will not. But I remember when I transitioned into the district, I think I was the fifth principal in like
Mm,
4 years.
mm,
Um, it may have been the sixth principal in 5 years, something like that, right?
okay.
And so I will say this. I didn't know that coming into the space. I just knew that the building had suffered from different dynamics. And so when I first met the very first teacher who came up to greet me, like my first, maybe the first or second day I had been in the district, that person had alerted me of, yeah, well, you like our fifth principal, and we don't even know if you, pretty much, we don't know if you staying.
Wow.
So, and
Wow.
it wasn't because that person didn't want, or that school didn't want a principal to stay. It was because other principals jumped ship,
Mm,
right? That building required like drastic measures to take place. But I will say the beauty of that in my first year with that cohort of teachers is that there wasn't a lot of resistance because the leadership was so unstable, and they wanted stability,
they were
right?
hungry for
They were
stability.
hungry for somebody to come in and not jump ship, right? They had been
Okay.
let down, right? So, but that trust factor came up. Like, can we trust you enough to know that you're going to
Mm-hmm.
stay here another year?
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, so that dynamic was a little different. So when you go into a culture like that, it allows the transition and the change that needs to happen to occur, right? Because I will say, like, by that end of that first year, we had seen higher gains based
Hmm.
on the competitive school, I say, in the
Hmm.
district, right? Our assessment scores were mirroring theirs. right? And
Nice.
so the difference in that group of teachers was that, they were thrive they were hungry for someone to come in and commit to
Mm-hmm.
staying. So they agreed, like, if you're staying with us, then we're gonna rock with you,
Right.
you know.
No, that's
and
beautiful.
and 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 that's a big difference. That's a big difference. And not all schools are like that.
Mm-hmm.
uh like, we know, right? Not all spaces are like that, because you have to
Absolutely.
flip that, where the
But
resistance is greater.
let me say this though. I think one of the key components for this, and I think you've kind of your narrative kind of exemplifies it, the need for communication, the role
Mm.
of communication. Engaging the practitioners, you kind of got a sense that they want some stability, right? Nobody like if I got to see somebody new in charge every year, after a while, it's like, do I want to be here? But you began having conversation, and kind of fostered a level of trust. So when we talk about that, right, what communication strategies help leaders build buy-in? I hate that word, right? Because that's been
Me
my
too.
pet peeve
Me too.
forever.
Me too. Me too. We,
And
we can
help
talk
keep the
about that in a little
momentum during
bit.
change during the change process. Ooh, I hate buying.
What communication, right? So the one thing I will say, and I remember this from you, Kwame, and I have this now to some degree, depending on
Okay.
who it is. I remember, right, when I first started working with you, you'd be like, come up in the office. You want to curse me out? Close the door. We could get it in. Whatever. Not saying you and I, we didn't have those issues, but you allowed that of some of the practitioners who were with you, right? And
The
so,
space.
yeah, the space, right? So now I'm not gonna let everybody come in my office and do that. I ain't that open like you were. But there are people in my space currently, right, who, you don't like something I say, we come in the office, you know, we yell, we disagree. But there's, some, and I don't say yes all the time. I drive home and I
Mm-hmm.
reflect. But the fact that there are people in spaces where that dialogue is open enough, that's where you get like that real picture of what you might be doing as a school leader, what you don't need to do versus what you need to do. So having like a setting where some open dialogue can happen, and transparency,
Right.
right?
Right. That's
The building
critical.
leader, I think transparency works both ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can't be a transparent leader if I don't have a transparent staff. I can try transparency, right? I can show you who I am, what I'm about. But ultimately, if both parties are not transparent with each other, then the learning and the need to increase student um, aptitude is not going to happen. That's just the bottom
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know folks used to that folks did not believe that, hey, this guy's saying, you got something you want to say. Listen, we're grown folks in this place, right? Come on in, close the door, respectfully. I take my admin hat off, you take your teacher hat off. We in there just as adults, and speak your mind. Speak your
line.
mind. Trust me, it will not be held against you. I think in that
Mhm.
whole time, I only had one practitioner take advantage of that. And she was shocked. She was shocked that I allowed her to just come in and just let it out. And I'm going, I'm not taking any of this personal, right? Because I understand
Mhm.
the human dynamic. People sometimes don't know how to receive what you're saying, and they put the interpretation on it in a way that may not even be remotely close to what you mean. But she felt strong enough that, you know what, I want to take advantage of that opportunity you've been talking about the last couple of years. I said, come on in. And, to this day, every time I see her, she goes, I can't believe you let me do that. And I'm going, well, listen, I gave you the space, right?
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I wish more people would have taken advantage of that so that we could get our cards on the table. to really push that change dynamic probably would have happened a lot faster than it, than the length of time it took us to get to that point where we needed to be to turn that building around. Um,
Yeah.
so I think this kind of ties into knowing if change is really making a difference. How should schools measure whether change is working, and what short term goals and long term goals of success look like
Well,
from your
got
experience, right?
you have hard and soft ways of doing it, right?
Okay.
So the more concrete methods of determining your changes, of course, through hard data platforms, right? How kids are performing, yada yada yada, right? On the tests, right? Because they always push the test, right? And your annual
Mm-hmm.
school plan. That's what the state, right, dictates for us as being successful. But we
Right.
know that in the schoolhouse, that doesn't just dictate success, right? So now we look at that soft data, right? That soft data mining. And so when I think about as a school leader, the two a teacher and a student bonding, right? Having a
Is a win.
relationship where right, that's a win. Like I didn't start off liking you, you didn't start off
Hmm.
liking me as my teacher, right? Because the truth be told, there are teachers who don't like students, and there are students who don't like teachers, and there are principals who don't like teachers, and the cycle continues. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, looking at how relationships have formed, right? Because at the end of the day, the person that impacts instruction the most is the teacher. It is not the principal.
Absolutely.
And so if that
Absolutely.
means that I gotta sit on the couch at little Johnny's house and learn about his family and get to know that he likes puppies, or he likes reading comic books, and he wasn't doing any work in my class, and now Johnny shows up and he wants to work for me, that's because I forged a relationship with him. So for me, seeing that over a period of time where uh it didn't happen before, that's measuring growth, right?
Absolutely.
If
And
I have kids who never like coming to school, and all of a sudden they got a teacher that they absolutely love, and they run to that class and they show up to that class every day, and they're afraid to be late in Mr. So and so's class, well, it's something great that Mr. So and so is doing in that space for you to be able to come to school every day and actually enjoy it, right? So that's how you measure success. It doesn't always look like pencil and paper, right?
right.
And those kind of outcomes.
And the unfortunate thing is that because we are tied to the state, their primary measure of our successes is based
Mhm.
on test scores.
Yeah, I mean that's
Meanwhile, we know, as you're saying, there's a host of things that are changing and happening in terms of positive growth that are not measured. And so that becomes part of our almost catch 22. We're doing great in areas that they're not measuring. The one area that they're measuring and holding us accountable for, we're not growing as quickly as we would like to grow. Right. And so that becomes part of the challenge. Um,
here's the
once
other part
change
to that
starts,
comment. Can I interject for a moment?
absolutely.
The other part to that is they there needs to be a different way or different methods of assessing
Oh,
school
that I think we talked
school
about this
growth.
a while ago.
So everything is not that hard data set. So you know um, there has to be a point in time where education is looked at differently in terms of measuring the successes in schools. So
Right.
we're not connecting everything to just while it is important, it is not
I've always been against that being the primary measure, right?
Mhm.
Because when we were going through it, and we had the state breathing down our back and leadership breathing down our back and the unions on us because they felt that we were being unreasonable in the way that things were being done. we saw a lot of change, but those changes were not what was being measured. And so as a consequence, we lost out on a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, holding me accountable just for one, let's say 10 things, and you're only holding us accountable for the 1/10 of those 10 things, and that 1/10 is the end all be all, I think is greatly unfair to a lot of practitioners, leaders, and the school system in and of itself. Because you might have inherited a school where, whoo, behavior, the climate, the culture is, as the expression goes, off the hook, right?
Mm-hmm.
But through
Mm-hmm.
some programs and incentivized elements that you put in place, you have a different environment. Kids are coming to school, they're showing up on time. You know, those things are critically important as well. And those, I think, also should be given a greater uh, piece of the pie, so to speak, in terms of the criteria for growth.
Kwame, we got some comments. I'm seeing some comments fly up on the.
Yeah, I've been sending them up to the screen. Uh, if they have questions, we'll definitely address them. I don't think I've gotten any questions, but Dr. Burnett is saying yes. Talk about it. Teachers shape instructional growth, and student connections, while leaders shape the culture that sustains success. And I think that's a valid point. You know,
Mhm.
it's a 1-2 punch that needs to be in play. Um, we can't have one party getting into their feelings because they can't have it their way. You know my line with that, right? This ain't Burger King. You cannot
You
have it
can't
your
handle
way.
it your way. Listen, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Right, there is a seriousness to this, right? We have alarming numbers of children who are illiterate
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of words, right? We have black boys who are suspended constantly from schools, right?
Yes.
Black and brown boys. We have there's almost a sense of denial of, to me, in certain
Mm-hmm.
spaces, right? And this is just based on different experiences, or hearing from other colleagues I have in the profession, things I've encountered, my readings. We have a disproportionate number of black boys who are being referred for special education, right?
That's a huge
being,
number there.
being put out
Low
of
spec
school,
classes, predominantly
right,
boys, and it's
right, right,
predominantly
right,
black and
right.
brown boys.
And a lot of them are placed in there because of anger and aggression, allegedly,
Behavior.
right? But behavior, right? A lot of them are getting suspended at higher rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is almost in some spaces where black boys are ignored in some educational spaces,
I can't just
right?
say some. It's a lot of spaces. Let's
Right,
keep it
right, right. But
100.
that's right. So, and then sometimes the focus and attention is placed on girls because the girls, quote unquote, listen. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is this, right? Those are like, some soft data points without putting out numbers, right? But it's the reality. And so there has to be a sense of urgency with all of us, right?
Absolutely.
So at some point, we got to get out of this mindset of just being worried about saving our jobs. At the end of the day, we need to save communities. We need to save the lives of our black village, our black and brown villages, right? So at some point we have to step back and say, look, it's not about us, because if we lose these boys, what happens to our village? What happens to our households? What happens to our homes? What happens to the generations after that? Like, this is a
So
bigger contextual conversation, Kwame. Like, so
absolutely,
we
absolutely.
gotta
And you
get
know
out
where
of
I'm
we
going.
gotta
I'm going. You
get out
know
of this.
what I'm about to say to that, right?
I know. Let me just finish my point. I know you about to jump in. I see you, like, you double dutching right here. You about to jump in. So give me a second. What I'm trying to say is there is such a need for urgency, and everybody, people need to just get out of their way. Like at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, it is not about us. It is about what we're going to do to better educate our children so that they can be the leaders in the communities that we have, and so that they can become productive citizens and even beyond that. So we gotta get our own way, and it hurts me to the core because we've been in spaces, Kwame. It hurts me to the core when the most resistance I've seen has come from
Mm.
some minority educators.
I would say preach, but
I'm gonna
you know,
pause there.
you already know that, right? So with that point, understand that it's systemic. It's unfortunate that we are kind of caught up in that mix. As much
Yep.
as we want to change or try to make those changes, as recently I saw a reel that spoke to the fact that the system is working the way it's intended to work, right?
Mhm.
let's let's get these black boys out of the equation. Let's put them into this sector, right? We That's that stigma is going to follow them for an extended period of time throughout their lives. If they don't have the proper guidance, they end up in the system in the way that benefits the system, right? People hate when I use that terminology, but this is the reality. We can sit here and sugarcoat it and say, oh, black folks like to complain, da 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 da. Listen, the game, you can't even say it's rigged because the game is the game, right? We're just trying to figure out how to navigate without getting caught in the trap. And
Yeah.
so, to your point, you are absolutely correct that sometimes the hardest resistors to change that will be beneficial to scholars are the very people that look like the population that we deal with.
Mhm.
And you have to
Mhm.
question, like, what is your deal? What is your deal? And that can be very frustrating for an instructional leader who is vested. So again, going back to this conversation, bringing it back, so to speak, right? You're about to get me into that realm of politics. I'm trying to not go into
Yeah,
that
let's not
space,
let's not let's not go
right?
there. Let's not
But
go there.
let's talk about the change, though. Once change starts, right, or once it starts to take hold, the challenge is making it last, right? So, how can schools avoid initiative fatigue? Number one, ensuring that change becomes part of the culture instead of just a 1 year project. Because you and I know we've had some initiatives that year one is a go, 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 all hands on deck. Year two, you're like, okay, let's continue. And the folks that were all go, 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 go are like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, we're not really gonna mess with that too much. We want to do this other thing.
Yeah. So, I'm going to always connect it back to instruction and curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I think that's where we see a lot of drastic changes happening, right? It's always like, okay, this program, that program, this. The one
Mm-hmm.
thing that does not change in any educational setting is the instructional practices, right? So, over the course of, teaching has been teaching, right? What people have done is coined different phrases or different terminology to define how, a multiple response strategy looks,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or, or how to get kids to have conversations, right? The names of those things have changed, but the practices have been valid since you and I were in school.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I generally tell my teachers, like, whoa, stop. I don't care what program comes in here. We teach. That never changes.
Right.
So how do you you hold hands with your staff, you teach. You teach and you show them how to teach for the ones who are not or have not, delivered content the way that you want content
You
to be
hope they
delivered.
will.
So I think, something like how do you get changes to stick? I think you focus on the pedagogical practices of
Absolutely.
teaching and learning. And I'm not saying you disregard resources because districts invest a lot of money in resources, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, they could bring 100 resources into a building. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, you have to know how to teach it,
Absolutely.
right? And so,
Absolutely.
right, so I think when you ground your work in the practices of teaching, that and you focus on that shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
That shift lasts a longer period of time than a resource that somebody might put
Oh,
in place,
absolutely. Absolutely.
right? And so
Absolutely.
so that's like one area for me as far as when we talk about instructional leadership, change leadership, transformational leadership, whatever that is, right? Um, being able to evoke those educational practices, that's what sticks.
Abs-
Everything else goes out the door with whatever regime comes in play. So today we got these five administrators. They believe in the balanced literacy model. You're going to implement the balanced literacy model. You're going to have benchmark curriculum resources, whatever that is, right? Soon as Kwame and Solomon come in and they, I'm just using us as an example,
hey,
we're
listen,
going to
it's
be the
all
next
good.
admin. They're going to say, we're going to use this curricular resource. Okay. And that's where teachers start to say, I'm gonna wait for the next regime to come in because
Right.
we're just looking at the resources and not focusing on the practices. So I think when we talk about some change that, when we try to evoke lasting change, we need to focus on instructional practices.
And
That I
that is
think is
that
lasts
that
longer than
is
any.
at the very root of moving scholars from where they are to where they need to be. Additionally, I think one of the things that needs to also be in place is continuity.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Continuity, I think, is critically important because it allows for certain practices to become part of the culture over a period of time versus the one and done. This year we're doing this. Next year somebody comes up with some new stuff and ooh, that looks good. Let's try that. Right? So the constant change, you talk about change fatigue, that is part of the challenge. Like, let's find something that we're going to hone our skills, or as the expression goes, cut our teeth on and make it
Mhm.
our thing, right? I think we tried at one point to, the Hubbard way, right? We do things a certain way, right? Because it has to be almost institutionalized. Apple has a certain way that they do business. J&J has a certain way, right?
Mhm.
Similarly, in your instructional settings, you need to develop that way that we do things that are in the best interest of scholars and affords practitioners opportunity for continuous growth.
Listen, Kwame, I'm gonna tell you, you're right when you say that, like that trademarking kind of system or way of
Mm-hmm.
doing things. I laugh. I'm thinking about one of my teachers now, and I remember when a new staff member came on board, and they told the new staff member, "Forget whatever you knew about public education. You are in Solomon's world now." and so,
Hilarious.
and so when they came back and told me that, I cracked up because I think as leaders, you brand yourself good, right, wrong, bad, and different, right?
Mm-hmm.
You brand yourself and you do have a trademark, whatever that is. You have a trademark, calling card,
Right.
whatever you call it, right? And you have a brand. And so when people have worked with you for a long period of time, they get to know your leadership style, your leadership ability, your potential to do more than
Right.
what you're doing. And so you know, knowing that, great systems, great strategies, great practices, those are all the things that make up a dynamic leader, right? And so
Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
are branding yourself, right? So I'm sure, like, you have a set way of evoking change, and so people know that when they come to work for you, there's an expectation. Like one of my teachers said, we were rewriting the mission and vision for our school, and so the question was, what is it that you know about your school? And one person said, you gonna come here and teach. If you work here, you coming here to teach, right?
That's
And
right.
so
That's
at
right.
the end of the day, that's what you're
That's your
known
brand.
for. That's
That's
your
your
brand. That's what
brand.
you're known for.
Everybody know.
Right. And so when you go into another space and you have to evoke change, and your reputation precedes you, there's that, shoot, I know if if Solomon come in my building, I'm gonna have to teach. There's no, you're not getting off the hook with that,
Nah,
right?
this ain't
You know,
a vacation spot.
right. Because Kwame, truth be told, we want to be on vacation too, but at the end of, it's such an urgency for
Say
our
that again.
kids. can't we we can't. Here's the other part to that, right? um as a building leader, I always say, you to evoke change and whatever, because you're it's very rare that a leader can hit every facet of school improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to decide, as a building principal, what's essential for you. What's the most important part of school improvement that you need to make in order to create a turnaround or shift? And then you wrap your mind and you start to build out your plans, and create excitement around it, whatever it is that you do. And so, as that building leader, when you focus on those one or two principles or one two areas of school improvement, I think when you hone in and you show people how to get to the space that you want them to be in, right? That makes the resistance a little different, and the change starts to happen a little. It can happen slowly, but you start to see some shifts happen, right?
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
can't expect people to do what you can't do,
That part.
right? Right.
So
So, you know, like
great, great, great.
I can't tell my teachers to build relationships with my kids if I don't have relationships with my kids. That's crazy.
Or with them.
Or,
Or try
well,
to build it with them.
that's a little different conversation. I'm gonna save that for another conversation. With my kids, right? I would say I'm gonna emphasize with my kids, because when I
That's the
walk into the
starting point.
space,
That's the starting point.
that is my main. And from working with me, Kwame, my main drive is my kids,
It's always about
and
the
my
kids.
own, right? So I don't care. I'm gonna say, I'm sorry, adults. It's not that I don't care about the adults. I care more about how children thrive and succeed, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
we've already been in our spaces where some of us feel like we've arrived, or we've gotten to a certain plateau in our lives, whatever. Our kids should be afforded that same opportunity. And so
Absolutely.
that's my charge as the building leader, to try to get them to that. So when I walk into that space, my focus is always kids. It's kids. Everything I do in my building or in my spaces is about kids. That's
And
it.
it's as it should be. As it should be, because that's the purpose of all. They are the reasons why we're there. Right. And Dr. Solomon, those are great, great strategies. Before we close, because I just realized we are at the 24-minute mark.
We
Before
gotta
we
take
got
some
about
questions,
6 minutes,
mommy.
I'm trying not to go beyond that 1 hour window.
We ain't take no
But before,
questions.
huh?
We
What was
didn't take
that?
any questions.
There weren't any questions. Everybody had comments. I didn't see one
I think
question.
Ralph. I thought I saw a question from Ralph.
You saw a question from Ralph.
I thought I
Um,
did. I thought I did.
okay. We'll tackle that. To what extent are school climate and culture critical indicators of institutional success rather than merely aspirational or symbolic tools.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ralph, Ralph, why you ask that question, Ralph? Ralph, a teacher.
You remember? I think Mr. Johnson, but um,
Oh yeah, that's my buddy. I
yeah,
know him.
yeah, yeah. But that's a great question because the question is, to what extent are they school climate and culture critical indicators of institutional success? They are this. I think they serve as part of the foundation of success, right? Because if we can have a climate where scholars can take academic risk, scholars can be who they are without adults judging them, right? Adults can can take risk and think outside the box without being persecuted or crucified. I think that definitely helped build the foundation needed to affect the change that we're looking to implement or have as we move through the academic year. So I think that's a critical. Those are foundational elements that need to be in place when
Hmm.
you start talking about change. Anything from
I'm
you,
go-
Doc,
I'm
on
gonna
that?
say I agree. I agree to that. I think because you speak of it from a position of a kid, of a child, and
Mm-hmm.
how climate and culture is important in the schoolhouse for them. So I'm going to leave that there, and
Okay. Okay.
because I
So
think that that's two different dynamics. But
absolutely, absolutely. So before we wrap up, though, we've had some great conversation. We talked about some strategies, but what would you say, or better yet, give us one practical thing our listeners can glean from, what one actionable step any teacher or school leader can take tomorrow to help implement change more effectively in their setting. What would
mm,
be something that you'll want to share with our folks?
I think the best for me, like the best experience I've had is especially when you're coming into a space where a lot of change or instability has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Find the people in the building that can help you move your message, can help you with the big lift.
Mm-hmm.
You
Absolutely.
cannot do everything on your own, so you have to have people who have been the driving force in the schoolhouse prior to you even getting there, and being part of teaming situations where the lift happens in a unified way amongst the staff, and it's not just a lift that you're carrying by yourself.
Those are great points. Great points. Great points. And so, folks, I have to say, this has been an interesting conversation. Dr. Solomon, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences. To our listeners, remember lasting change in school doesn't happen overnight, it happens through vision, persistence, and people working together. If you found today's conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to At the Desk with Dr. Qua. Also, be sure to share this episode with a colleague who's navigating change in their school. And of course, Dr. Solomon, what can I say? I appreciate your presence at the desk. Folks, let's have a terrific rest of the day. Real quick, Doc, how is
Yeah.
there any way folks can reach out to you? I'll make sure I include that in the description so that they can touch base if you would like for them to have that.
Um, my first name. Uh, I'll give you my email address. First name. The letter O is an Oscar,
Okay.
and it's solomon@gmail.com. That's the best way.
All right. So I will make that a part of the descriptor at the bottom of the description of this episode. We will make sure that this is evident so that you folks can touch base and reach out to you should they have any questions, suggestions. And folks, thank you so much for joining us. It is my hope that you glean something positive from being at the desk. Have a terrific rest of the day. Thank you, Dr. Solomon.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.